You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. Sometimes I have to go far and wide to get interesting guests, but sometimes right in your own backyard, you have the most interesting guests. With us right now is Mel Laytner. He worked for over 20 years for NBC News, UPI. He was a CEO of Laytner's Linen. They had 4 stores in the Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens area until he retired. And then when he retired, he wrote a fascinating book called What They Didn't Burn, Uncovering My Father's Holocaust Secrets. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Zev.
I enjoyed hearing you at the Jewish Center the other week. You spoke passionately. You were a journalist. You also were a CEO of the family business, which was very well established. I think was over 40. I think your father established the business when he got here after the Holocaust, right?
Well, Dad worked as a factory worker for a number of years, and then my parents opened up a candy store on 81st Street and Broadway, or they took over a candy store. And then 9 years after that, my father became ill and couldn't work 7 days a week, 12 to 14 hours a day. And in the candy store location, they opened the linen shop. And from there, my brother took over some years later while I was a foreign correspondent in London in the Middle East. And then I came back. Excuse me?
We're in Israel as well.
Yes, I was based in Jerusalem for 7 years, first as the Jerusalem correspondent for United Press International, and then as the Middle East radio correspondent for NBC News.
So you see your father got into the linen business, which was easier than the candy store business. It was a fixture for many years on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and the other areas where it was until it closed. I guess with the internet, everything shifted and migrated to the internet. There's a lot of retail businesses did.
Yes, our business too. My brother closed the last brick and mortar store just this year on the Upper West Side, after being a physical presence on the Upper West Side for over 60 years. And now Laytner's Linen and Home is a internet site, which he sends out regular pitches. And I think he's doing business as well. He has other business interests.
But you're out of it. When you retire, you're not in the business anymore.
Retail is a wonderful place to be from.
And you're from there.
Yes.
Now, your father, Joseph, is a Holocaust survivor, and you grew up and you heard stories about the Holocaust from your father, correct? He spoke about his experiences. Unlike some other people on the West Side, some survivors never spoke about it. Your father spoke about what he went through.
Yes, my father told me brief stories from a very young age. Of course, as I got into this research, I found out that his stories were all sanitized and scrubbed of any blood. My mother, on the other hand, was like the other survivors you referred to. She never spoke about her experiences. And she was also a survivor of Auschwitz-Birkenau.
Now, your father was mild-mannered, you're right about that, and yet you discovered that there are secrets, Holocaust secrets. He was a smuggler, he got involved in lots of other things which you look to uncover and document. So what prompted you to go ahead and see a different side of your father in writing this book?
Okay, it started because I was looking to confirm a story that he had told me, and I started researching some context, and I tripped over facts, and facts led to disclosures and documents. But behind it all, there's a reality that while all these survivors and all these video testimonials of survivors bear witness to what happened, over the coming years, younger generations will look at these things and they could not help but wonder, well, how much of it is exaggerated, how much of it is true. I set out to prove through independent sources my father's Holocaust stories. And I turned up things that he never told me about that I proved independently with eyewitnesses, people who were there, and more importantly, independent Nazi documents that spoke about him being the smuggler of diamonds, that spoke about his attempted escape using forged identity cards that traced him from 1942 through several camps and ghettos and death marches all the way through April 1945. I've tracked him. It is not urban legend. It is not a family fiction or family fable. It is fact. And that to me was very important.
So what did you discover about your father that you didn't know that perhaps surprised you the most?
Well, that's a difficult question to unpack because there are many levels to it. On the action level, I knew he was trading as a lot of Jews did in the labor camps, but I had no idea to what extent. And I had no idea that he was extremely active or that he had diamonds to exchange and to bribe with. I knew that he had gone through difficult times. I was not aware of the depths and the challenges that he faced in living. And all of this, again, was sort of a revelation. On a broader level, as a son, I did not really appreciate that probably for most of my youth, my father had been suffering through some form of PTSD or depression, like a lot of Holocaust survivors did. To me, he was just quiet dad. And that he was really depressed became a revelation, which I guess it shouldn't have had, but it was very surprising when it hit me.
But you make it sound in your book he was a different personality during the war than he was post-war when you were growing up.
Yes,
Personality.
I found out that, for example, at home he never listened to music. He was never physically active, really. He was very passive. I found out that in the camp, he was a respected leader. He was older than a lot of the people. He was in his 30s when he was in the camp. He used to help lead fellow prisoners walking from the camp to the work site in song. And he used to keep up morale. He looked out for them. Was a wheeler dealer in hot diamonds and vodka with Poles and British POWs. That was a total revelation, and that was not the type of man that I remember my father as at all.
Did your mother know this story?
What she knew and what she didn't know, I have no idea. She, on her own experiences, I could sum it up in one fat paragraph, everything that she told me about her experiences during the war. You know, they had their relationship, which to any child is pretty much a mystery. And regarding the war, it was a deeply buried mystery.
Well, you're right that a lot of the Holocaust survivors, which end up on the West Side, you had these men that survived. They married some very strong-willed women, and you know, they married. They spoke Yiddish. It was a whole culture. But I guess, like you said, in regular, normal times, maybe they would not have been matched up. But after the Holocaust, there were.
Yes, my father was, I think, 13 years older than my mother. He was in his, by that time, 34, 35. She was 21, 22. But you read about that they married quickly and had children and tried to rebuild their lives. And that's one of the takeaways I want to stress. This is a book that affirms life and that affirms the future. It is not a book that rolls around the misery of the Holocaust. Our parents moved ahead with their lives. And one of the messages I want to get across in the book is that we should as well. We should respect the past, but not be controlled by it.
Now, you also write your father was a smuggler, he was a leader, he had other people that he worked with. There was, you write about, for example, one time when he was caught by the Nazis. What happened? He goes in front of the head, I guess is the Judenrat or those who worked for the Germans, and he was beaten. What happened? There was an interesting insight that you provided.
Well, he was beaten a couple of times, but the one that I found very surprising was I came across early on, call it year one. I came across documents that showed that he had a signed confession that he had smuggled diamonds and that he had sold them at the 15 diamonds to a Pole at the workplace. And nobody could figure out how he survived, how he lived through that, because they were hanging people for much less. Months or a couple of years later, I came across a sentencing protocol, the actual two-sided printed form that my father, it talked about this diamond incident, and it sentenced him to 25 lashes. And that punishment was carried out by, surprisingly, a Jewish couple, a Dutch Jew by the name of Joseph Brassem. And I then, being the reporter, I then went ahead and I dug out his life and his story, which you come in with certain expectations and certain opinions. I mean, this guy, I found Nazi documents that showed he had beaten at least 17 other prisoners. But then when you dig beneath that, it's a little bit more complicated and a little bit more complex. And that adds to the roundness of trying to fill out this complicated story of what it meant to survive. What did you have to do to go through this experience and come out at the other end? It's not,
Rabbi, I think it was another incident where he was beaten by this Jewish capo. And
oh, you're talking about the Judenaltister of the camp beating.
Correct.
Oh, that was one of the first things I had heard right after my father's death. I went to meet an old friend of his who was an artist in Paris, and he told me this story right after his death, that my father was caught with a bottle of schnapps. He was dragged to the Judenaltister, a guy named Karl Demerer, and Demerer, in front of the German, beat my father up, kicked him, beat him, and threatened to kill him and my father crawled away in his hands and knees. And then my father's friend Walter turns to me and says, "And that's how Demerer saved your father's life." I go, "What do you mean saved?" He says, "Don't you understand? If Demerer hadn't beaten him, this Nazi would have killed him like a fly." Isn't this fantastic? And I was just speechless. This is an insight that you don't get.
I was very taken by that, but it's very true. By his being beaten, he saved him from being killed. The Nazis, I guess, reveled in the fact that Jews beating another Jew up when he saw that happen.
Absolutely.
So sort of took away from them saying, I got to punish this Jew.
Absolutely. And Demerer talks about that. I tracked down Demerer's life story as well. And when Demerer moved to Israel in '66, he had a birthday party. And over 150 survivors from Blechhammer, the camp that he sort of ran, signed a birthday card, which was a big placard, and they put their tattoo numbers underneath their signatures. So, you know, that's also part of the story. His story is also part of the book.
We're speaking with Mel Laytner. His fascinating book is called What They Didn't Burn, Uncovering My Father's Holocaust Secrets. He formerly was an NBC UPI reporter, including having served in Israel. And since he was also as the former executive at Laytner's Linens, which had 4 stores in New York City until they merged and morphed into the internet. Now, you are a journalist. Journalists are supposed to be impassionate. You're supposed to look in the facts, even though today's journalists may be different than in your day. I think today they become more partisan, but that's what a journalist is supposed to be. So how did you reconcile that with the fact you're writing a story, a memoir, where you're supposed to be passionate about and really glorify the person you're writing about? How do you reconcile both factors that you have when writing this book?
It was probably the biggest challenge I had in approaching this subject material and writing the book. I had initially started out writing a microhistory of this particular labor camp, informed by personal Nazi documents. As I got into it, editors and colleagues told me, "No, you're not going to be able to get away with that. You're going to have to expose your feelings about your relationship with your father. You're going to have to talk about these intimate family things." And I said, that's bull. I don't have to do that. Reporters don't do that. But as I got into it, I saw they were right and I was wrong. And it took several rewrites and a lot of coaching to be able to find a way to integrate the, if you will, the objectivity, the cold objectivity of investigative journalism with the passion and the personal aspect of memoir. And, I hope I did a good job.
No, you did. Now what's amazing is that the Nazis burned Jewish bodies when they saw they were losing, but it's amazing how many documents still survive. This is, I guess, the title of your book, that while they killed Jews, burned Jews, but there still was a lot of evidence that you were able to uncover.
Yes, and that was another object of the book, to show people how much is out there. And I'll tell you something else that a lot of people don't recognize or realize. When I started this, I spent hours and hours and countless miles traveling to archives. I spent, days in the Yad Vashem archives. I spent days in the Washington Holocaust Museum's archive. I traveled to Poland 3 times to dig into records. In the last 5 or 6 years, certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, so much has come online. So much is now accessible with a few clicks of the internet. The cooperation between different Holocaust museums and archives has grown exponentially. And your listeners, with a little bit of effort and a little bit of coaching, can find incredible information that people don't realize is out there. And that's very important for.
Well, the Germans kept very meticulous records. They really were very good at that.
Yes, that's part of it. That's obviously the key part of it. They kept meticulous records and multiple records across multiple bureaucracies. So if you don't find a front door, you can find a side door, you can find a window, and you have to be able to intuit pieces of evidence. Well, this thing suggests that. So you do have to have some deep knowledge of the history to make sense of it. But
what story stands out in your mind when you did all your research, found out more about your father? There was a different person that you knew. Is there any particular story or stories that come to mind that really stick out?
Well, when the thing that persuaded me that I had more than just, like, let's say, a magazine story, but I had a book, I guess, was the confirmation I received. He told me a story about, well, back up. I was a kid. I asked my father, why didn't you just run away? Escape like in the movies. I was, 8, 10 years old. And he said, well, not so easy, shaved head, tattooed arm, uniform, striped pajamas. But he then tells me he did try to escape. And he tells me the story about he and a friend who I knew, his friend, Charlie Fetter, came up with this scheme where they would get the British POWs to take their photographs, send the photographs to Charlie's connections in the Polish underground, have forged ID cards made and escape, but he says the Gestapo raided the forgery shop, found Charlie's photograph, traced it back to Blechhammer. Eventually, Charlie, under torture, implicated my father, and Charlie was sent to be gassed at Auschwitz. And then my father said, how he escaped is another story, his story. And I was a kid, and to me it was wow, but I never really was able to wrap my mind around how come the Nazis didn't kill my father just because they couldn't prove anything, and I never repeated that story to my daughters. I never, it was in the back of my head. And then I came across this Nazi document by an SS officer linking him selling diamonds to this escape attempt, spelling it out for me. And this was a eureka moment. This really said to me, damn, this guy really did stuff. He really was in the thick of these schemes. This is not the father I knew. That was very.
So what happened with that? So why was he spared? You started spelling it out. So what transpired?
Why he was spared, I never found out. That he was spared is a fact. I've had different opinions, from Auschwitz historians, in other words, historians associated with the Auschwitz Museum, to fellow survivors, that the Germans didn't want to kill the golden goose. Here was a source of diamonds, and if they killed him, they would lose their own source of bribery.
Basically, what you're saying is, which is what I thought, is that he was perhaps supplying diamonds to the Nazis, made a deal with them.
Well, he used diamonds to bribe them, for sure. He told me one case where he used what he described as a very tiny diamond. After he pulled his back out at the workplace, he had to go to the infirmary. And he bribed the German in charge of the infirmary with a tiny diamond, and that bought him a week of liniment back rubs and being, and resting. But the point of his story wasn't the diamond, which is why I didn't focus on this. The point of his story was that from time to time, the SS would come in, clear out the infirmary, and send all the patients to Birkenau to be gassed. So you didn't want to be in the infirmary if you didn't have to. So there was a risk involved. Do you go to the infirmary and risk being sent to be gassed? Or do you not go to the infirmary and definitely get beaten to death because you can't work because you pulled your back out? So that was the point of his story. And the moral of all of his stories, Zev, he repeated this to me at the end of just about every story, was, it didn't matter if you were smart or dumb, had money or not, all that mattered was luck. You needed luck to survive.
Or God.
Yet the truth was, survival, yes, you needed luck, but you had to be active. You had to be proactive. You couldn't just depend on your luck. As Walter Spitzer, my father's friend, who never heard about my father with diamonds, and he was his friend before the camps, during the camps, and 40 years after the war, Walter turned to me and said, yeah, you needed luck, but if you had diamonds, you could improve your luck. And that was a key takeaway too about my father.
I'm curious, growing up, did religion play any role? I know you spoke Yiddish at home. Now, what was he religious-wise before the war, during the war, and after the war, and what kind of environment did you grow up in?
Before the war, the family was traditional, but not Orthodox. They like a lot of Polish families, there was no, in other words, there was no conservative or reform streams. You were observant to one degree or another, and his family was observant. One time when I was 10 years old, and I write about this in the book, it was during the high holidays. We were in our little, it was larger than a stiebel, but not much larger. on West End Avenue and 84th Street, or synagogue, family.
Which synagogue was that? Probably doesn't exist anymore on
I
84.
don't remember the name of the rabbi. I know the family quite well. He was my bar mitzvah rabbi.
Wasn't there a Rabbi Gordon of the Gordon family?
Oh, nope. It'll come to me and I'll blurt it out. But
Okay.
anyway, we were sitting, it was a congregation of survivors. There were maybe 40 families on Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. I was going to yeshiva as a kid.
Which one?
At that time, the Manhattan Day School. But
Yeah.
so we were in prayer, and there were a lot of people wearing stromels, and it was only survivors. There were Yekas, and there were Polacks, and there were Magyars, but there were no American-born Jews. That's my point. And we're in it, and my father at one point leans over to me and he says, "I can understand thanking God, but why do we have to repeat ourselves so often?" I'm a kid, I'm about 12, and I turned to him and I said, "Dad, do you believe in God?" And we're whispering. And he sort of bites his lip and his cheek, and he sucks in and he nods like he always does. And he says to me in a very low whisper, "No God worthy of the name would have allowed what I saw during the war." And that was quite a surprise. Now, having said that, as I grew up and we had discussions, I realized he was not an atheist, but he really questioned, like Spinoza, a God who answers personal prayer, or like Einstein said that, God, the perfectness of the universe could not be up to chance. There must be something behind it. And of course, when his own mother passed away, she had immigrated to the US before the war. He went to say Kaddish three times a day for a year. He was part of a minyan and he followed tradition. And of course, my parents did send me and my younger brother to yeshiva.
I used to, when you had a kosher home, we kept Shabbos, holidays.
Yes. Well, we had a kosher home. Mom lit candles. When we had the candy store, no, they worked on Saturday. The store was open. Retail was Saturday. It's the way it was, and it's the way it is for a lot of families.
I think a lot of families in those days, they went to synagogue Saturday morning, Shabbos morning, went to work afterwards.
My father, well, not the candy store, I can tell you that. When my father worked in a factory, we went to the JC, the Jewish Center, most Shabbats. And
You were bar mitzvah there too, if I remember correctly.
I had the bar mitzvah party there. The actual reading of the Parsha and the Haftorah and all of that was at that small family synagogue whose name unfortunately eludes me. The rabbi passed away like 30 years ago. And, the building was sold. They're no longer there.
Now, did your father ran Laytner's Linens for many years, and you were the CEO there as well. Would you say some of the skills that he got, trading diamonds and smuggling and doing all kinds of deals, would that help him in running the linen enterprise?
Okay, two points. One, I was a partner, not a CEO. My brother was really the power behind the store. He started it with my father, or he worked with my father for a decade before I joined the business. So I don't want him to get Bruigus at me by claiming to be the CEO. Okay, there's enough problems between brothers, right? Okay. This is it. Whatever business acumen my father got from smuggling diamonds, if that translated into the linen store, I was too naive or too dumb to understand it. The parents tried several businesses that failed, and I talk about that during the war in the book too. Being an immigrant to the U.S. After the war was not easy if you didn't have the language and you didn't have the education and you spoke with accents. Just trying to raise a family was challenging. And I don't think it's changed for any other ethnic minority that's come here to this country. It's a tough go, you know. Whether he got skills, I don't know specifically. What he did get was tenacity and, you know, the drive to succeed.
But one of the things that I find a lot of Holocaust survivors came to America were successful. And I think is, you know, if you have a challenge or if you have a setback, you keep moving. You don't let any setback stop you from your goal. So I think that tenacity may have come from unfortunate experience of being in the Holocaust and surviving and doing whatever you had to do to survive. And when it came to relationships or business, especially, they did what they had to. If you have one setback, you keep going. You don't let it stop you.
100%. I thought your question was whether he picked up like specific skills, whether it's bookkeeping or
But
inventory.
that was a part of it. You know, listen, he had to make deals with some of the toughest people dealing with the Nazis, and your life is at stake and you're making a deal. You got to be a good negotiator to do so. And obviously he was very skilled. So that skills probably served him well in his business capacity, whether in the linen store.
It no doubt did. It no doubt did. I think he took a lot of life lessons and he turned it around for good and positive. And he didn't let it defeat him, as you point out. The survivors who came here, my mother was in a hospital for a year, almost suffering from TB after the war. She came out and she was a fighter, you know. My father was a fighter. Their circle of friends, they all started with nothing and made lives for themselves. That of course,
They came with a penny to their names to this country.
they came penniless, and with nothing but grit and determination. And that's very important for us children of survivors to take away. I get a little depressed sometimes when my generation, the first generation children of survivors, sort of wallow in the misery rather than taking the strong points, the positive, and moving forward.
They accomplished quite a bit. Like I said, with just a shirt on their backs, they came in, they swept floors, they did whatever had to be done, and they were able to build empires in business and also build families. And to me, the biggest success over Hitler is that when you have every Jewish baby, it's a success over Hitler. That's shows the ultimate. And I think that's always bothered me, and I don't know if it bothered you, is why didn't Jews engage in revenge after the war? Yeah, there was a small group that did, but most Jews didn't get involved with revenge. They got involved in building their lives, building their families. And ultimately, that's the ultimate revenge, is being successful and having Jewish children, having Jewish families, having that continuity that Hitler and the Nazis try to wipe out.
100%. And that's a lesson that we hopefully pass on to our own children as well. And I think it gets more and more challenging the further removed we are from those days and from those incidents.
Are your kids as taken with the Holocaust as you are?
No, of course not. And their kids will even be less. They read, they know about it. The book was written, you know, the dedication of the book is to my children's children, never forget. That's who the book is dedicated to. And one hopes that I did my job in passing on the importance of remembering and keeping true to my kids, and I hope they do to their kids and so on. But, you know.
Final question. What made you decide to leave journalism? You were at NBC News, UPI, to become an executive in your family business, in the Laytner's Linens?
Well, that's also a multi-level question. And for one thing, for years, you have to understand, my family was trying to pull me into the business, and I resisted. And then what honestly happened was that I didn't leave journalism as much as journalism left me. The media was changing. I was accepted. I received a mid-career fellowship at Columbia University called the Badgett Fellowship in Business and Economic Journalism. NBC, while I was away that year at school, NBC was bought by General Electric. General Electric spun off the radio division. And by the time I got out of Columbia that May, it was a one-year program, everybody I had worked with in New York, London, and Washington that I knew at NBC was gone. It was part of one of the first waves of the consolidation of the media, which is being continued to this day. So I had no place even to go back to work. And I said, okay, let's try this business thing. I've got a year of business school. I know everything there is to know. How hard can it be? Oy vey mia.
It was harder than you expected, right? Did
Oh,
you miss,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
journalism? Did you miss it when you went to corporate?
Did I miss journalism?
Did you miss that? Listen, a different lifestyle, different excitement than being involved in the retail business. Did you miss?
I missed, but I'm not the first retired journalist to say a retired journalist is an oxymoron. You don't really.
Well, you're back into it. Your book is proof of that. It's.
I'm also on the board of a nonprofit newspaper in the Hudson Valley, and I'm on the board of the Silurians Press Club, which is one of the oldest New York press clubs in America. It's over 100 years old. So yeah, you keep your hand in it, but that was then, and this is now.
Mel Laytner, may I recommend your book, What They Didn't Burn, Uncovering My Father's Holocaust Secrets. He used to be with NBC, UPI. He also was based in Jerusalem and Israel. It's a wonderful book. I recommend it. Who would you like to play the part of your father, Joseph Dolik Laytner, if it was made into a movie? Toughest question of the interview.
Well, I don't know. If he were younger, I guess, Al Pacino would be good. Or Paul Newman would have been good, but my father wasn't that good looking. It would have been physically the wrong guy, but I'll let Spielberg decide.
Okay. Well, anyway, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Zev. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.